The fog rolls in off the coast of Portsmouth, shrouding the water in a suffocating gray blanket. It is August 1960, and something massive is moving in the mist. It is a silhouette that should strike terror into the hearts of enemies, a floating fortress of steel and fire. But today, there is no enemy. There is no war. There is only the mournful cry of a foghorn and the straining engines of tugboats dragging a Titan to its execution. This is the HMS Vanguard. She is the largest battleship Britain ever built. She carries 8 15-inch guns, capable of obliterating a target from miles away. She is the pinnacle of centuries of naval dominance, the ultimate expression of sea power. Yet as she looms through the swirling mist, she looks less like a warrior and more like a ghost. Her engines are dead. Her decks are silent. The 1,600 men who once called her home have vanished, replaced by a skeleton crew of just 60 souls huddled against the damp chill. They are not steering her to glory. They are steering her to a scrapyard. But why? Why would a nation bankrupt from war spend £11 million to build a weapon that would never fire a single shot in anger? Why construct a Leviathan only to strip it bare and melt it down? The answer lies buried in the desperate days of 1941, but the immediate problem is much more terrifying. Because on this final morning, as the tugs try to pull her toward her doom, the Vanguard does something impossible. She fights back. To understand this tragedy, we must rewind the clock to the bleakest moment of the Second World War. It is 1941. Europe has fallen. The Atlantic is a graveyard. Allied victory is not a plan, it is a distant hallucination. In the shipyards of Clydebank, men are laying the keel for a monster. They are building a savior. The plans call for a ship faster and more heavily armored than anything afloat. She is designed to hunt down German raiders, to be the iron fist of the Royal Navy. Millions of pounds are poured into her hull. Thousands of man-hours consume the shipyard. She is an act of defiance in steel. But the plan had a fatal flaw. Building a legend takes time, and time was the one thing the British Empire did not have. By the time the final rivet is driven and the champagne bottle shatters against her bow, the calendar reads 1946. The guns fall silent across Europe. The Japanese have surrendered. The atomic bomb has changed the physics of warfare forever. The Vanguard launches into a world that no longer needs her. She is a knight in full-plate armor arriving after the invention of the machine gun. This creates a bizarre and humiliating paradox. The most powerful battleship in history is instantly unemployed. Instead of hunting U-boats, she is assigned a role that feels almost insulting to her engineering. She becomes a royal taxi. In 1947, King George VI and the royal family step aboard not to command a battle, but to take a vacation to South Africa. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret play deck games beneath the shadow of massive artillery cannons that have never tasted smoke. The bridge where captains should be screaming, firing coordinates becomes a sightseeing platform. It is a glamorous facade masking a dark truth. The age of the battleship is dead. The aircraft carrier and the submarine now rule the waves. The Vanguard is a dinosaur walking amongst mammals, unaware that the meteor has already hit. But the indignity is not over. After a brief stint as the flagship of the home fleet, she is mothballed. She sits in reserve collecting rust and costing money. Finally, the order comes down from the Admiralty. It is a death sentence. She is to be scrapped, condemned to the breakers. But as the summer of 1960 approaches, a strange tension fills the air at Portsmouth. The fittings are stripped. The furniture, the memories, the soul of the ship are taken ashore. The vessel is now a hollow metal shell. A flock of tugboats descends upon the harbor like vultures. They attach their lines ready to drag the victim to Scotland. But the ship, which never fought a battle, is reluctant to die. As the lines go taut, a sudden violent shudder runs through the hull. With a last defiant gesture, the Vanguard swings her massive bow and shrugs her escort aside. She drifts toward the harbor entrance and runs aground. She stops dead. For almost an hour, the most sophisticated battleship of her generation refuses to move. She settles into the mud at the narrow entrance to the harbor, as if acknowledging the farewells of the holiday crowds. It is a moment of unplanned rebellion. The tugs churn the water, white engines screaming, straining against 45,000 tons of obstinate steel. It is a spectacle of man versus machine, where the machine seems to possess a will of its own. Is she waiting for a reprieve? Is she demanding the dignity of a burial at sea? The newspapers call it a struggle. The sailors call it a mutiny of metal. But the clock is ticking. Every hour she remains stuck is a humiliation for the Navy and a hazard to the harbor. Finally, with a groan that reverberates through the hull, the unwilling victim is dragged clear to the open sea. The journey that follows is a funeral procession through the fog. The newspaper men on board record the melancholy atmosphere. They lower their stories into special canisters to be picked up by boats because the radio silence is heavy. There is nothing to do but wait. In the echoing vastness of the empty ship, the 60 men left behind play cricket beneath the 15-inch guns. It is a surreal image. A game of leisure played inside a weapon of mass destruction that is slowly marching toward the guillotine. The emergency rations are broken out not for a disaster, but for a picnic. After 5 days of towing, the Vanguard returns to the Clyde where she was cradled, but she is not going to the builders. She is going to the breakers. The key is handed over. The executioners climb aboard. The hiss of oxyacetylene torches begins to scream. They start at the top and work down, slicing through the gun barrels that never fired. The sailors watching from the shore ask the question that has haunted this ship since her launch. Why? Could she not be preserved as a memorial? Could she not be sunk with honor? The cold economic reality is the final twist. The Earth is not abundant enough in raw materials to let 40,000 tons of high-grade steel rot on the ocean floor. A ship that molders in idleness serves no one. But a ship reduced to her constituent parts can live. The Vanguard cost £11 million. As scrap, she is worth perhaps a 20th of that. It seems like a staggering loss, a financial tragedy. But as the copper and brass are ripped from her bowels, as the 30,000 tons of armor plate are cut away, a new truth emerges. The Vanguard is being reborn. In the steelworks of Scotland and Sheffield, she is transmuted. Her hull becomes the framework for a new factory. Her decks become the steel girders of a block of flats. Her teak decks are carved into furniture. Her cork insulation becomes bath mats. The ship that was born too late to save the empire becomes the very fabric of the nation she was built to defend. The first Vanguard fought the Spanish Armada 400 years ago. This last Vanguard never fought at all, but her sacrifice was not on the battlefield. It was on the breaker's yard. She served her generation by vanishing into it, providing the raw materials for a post-war world rebuilding itself from the ashes. The problem was never the ship. The problem was time itself. She was the perfect weapon for a war that had already ended, and in her death she finally found a purpose that life had denied her. But does a noble death excuse a scandalous birth? The metal may be recycled, but the questions remain etched in the blueprints. To understand the magnitude of this folly, we must snap back to the beginning. We return to 1946, not to celebrate, but to investigate. The bunting is flying, the bands are playing. The Royal Navy presents its new champion to a war-weary world. She is 45,000 tons of aggressive diplomacy designed to terrorize the oceans. But as the champagne dries on the bow, the Admiralty is already sweating. They know something the cheering crowds do not. Do you build a fortress when the enemy has learned to fly? The first crack in the armor is invisible to the naked eye. It lies deep within the main turrets. The Vanguard is a brand new ship, but her teeth are geriatric. To save time during the desperate panic of construction, the engineers make a fatal compromise. They salvage the 15-inch guns from two glorious but dead ships, the Courageous and the Glorious. These weapons were forged in 1915 for the First World War. The Royal Navy is launching its futuristic flagship, armed with antiques. It is a Frankenstein monster of naval architecture, a modern body, driven by the heart of a ghost. The mechanism works perfectly, but the symbolism is disastrous. Britain is trying to fight the future with the weapons of the past, and then there is the silence. As the Vanguard begins her sea trials, she hunts for a sparring partner. She scans the horizon for the German Tirpitz or the Japanese Yamato. But the seas are empty. The monsters are all dead. The Vanguard is a gladiator stepping into the arena only to find the lights turned off and the spectators gone home. She pushes her engines to 30 knots, slicing through the Atlantic swells with terrifying grace. She is the fastest battleship in British history. But where is she rushing to? Suddenly, a new enemy attacks from within. It is not a torpedo, but a ledger. The British economy is imploding. The Lend-Lease money from America has stopped. Bread is rationed. Fuel is scarce. And here sits a voracious leviathan that demands a crew of 2,000 men just to keep the lights on. The Navy realizes with horror that they cannot afford to run her. But the seasoned sailors are leaving the service in droves, eager for civilian life. The ship is ready for war, but the nation is begging for peace. The most powerful weapon in the fleet becomes a hostage to the treasury before she even completes her first tour. Is she a protector of the realm or a parasite on the taxpayer? The Admiralty finds a solution that borders on the theatrical. If the Vanguard cannot fight a war, she must perform a play. She is hastily rebranded from a fortress into a floating palace for the royal family. The grim gray paint is touched up, and the hangars designed for reconnaissance aircraft are converted into viewing galleries. 45,000 tons of lethal intent are repurposed as a glorified taxi service for King George VI on a tour of South Africa. It is a dazzling spectacle of imperial majesty, but look closer at the deck. The sailors standing at attention are not scanning for U-boats, they are serving canapes. The Vanguard becomes the world's most expensive yacht, parading around the southern hemisphere, while the empire she symbolizes quietly unravels back home. Is this the dignity intended for the ultimate battleship? To be a prop in a geopolitical photo opportunity? But the ocean has a cruel sense of humor, and delivers a complication that no amount of polish can hide. During the royal voyage, the Vanguard encounters the harsh reality of simple physics. She is too big for the world she occupies. In harbor after harbor, she struggles to dock, her massive draft threatening to drag along the bottom, her sheer length making her unwieldy in ports designed for the smaller, efficient merchant ships of the new era. The pilot boats sweat and the tugs strain, fighting to keep the pride of the fleet from running aground in front of the cheering colonies. It is a logistical nightmare. The king waves from the bridge, but below decks, the engineers are battling a ship that fights the very geography it is meant to dominate. When the bunting comes down, and the royals return to London, the Vanguard is stripped of her finery and sent to the Mediterranean to finally act like a warship. She takes her place as the flagship, aiming her guns at the rocky coastlines in training exercises. For a brief moment, she looks the part. The 15-inch guns roar, shaking the sea, obliterating target rafts with pinpoint accuracy. The crew works with rhythmic perfection, proving that this is indeed the finest gun platform the Royal Navy has ever possessed. But then, the war games shift. A new player enters the simulation. A complication drops from the clouds, screaming at 600 miles an hour. It is the jet engine. During NATO exercises, the Vanguard is pitted against modern aircraft carriers and land-based jets. The result is humiliating. In the calculations of the umpires, the battleship is sunk within minutes. She cannot elevate her guns high enough or turn fast enough to track the silver streaks painting the sky. She is a dinosaur trying to swat a swarm of wasps. The admirals stare at the reports in disbelief. They have built the perfect counter to the German Bismarck, but the Bismarck is gone, and the new enemy doesn't even need to touch the water to kill her. How do you defend a horizon when death comes from the stratosphere? Corrosion. Without the heat of the boilers and the constant movement of the sea, the ship begins to eat herself. Condensation drips behind the bulkheads. The miles of electrical wiring, the nervous system of the ship, begin to degrade in the damp English air. To keep her combat ready requires a fortune in maintenance, a hemorrhage of cash for a weapon that sits motionless. The most powerful battleship ever built is now fighting a losing war against rust. Does a weapon exist if it never leaves its sheath?